Okay, we're just going to pick up right where we left off. We left off talking about eating together, and there's one last part of halacha that I want to mention about eating together. When one's wife is in nida, the halacha is that a man cannot eat his wife's leftovers. This is true whether it's referring to a drink or whether it's referring to solid food. Leftovers is not allowed to be eaten by him if it was already eaten by her. The other way around, however, is mutter. If he ate something and he left some of it over and his wife would like to eat the leftovers, that would be okay. What's important to know is a number of things. Let's say her plate is brought out onto the table, and on her plate she has a few items. And some of them are even large items. There's a piece of chicken, there's some salad on the side. What happens if she only eats one of the items on the plate? Let's say the chicken, and she leaves the salad. So it's a machlokes, but the halacha, it seems to me, is that he cannot eat anything from that plate. As soon as she ate something from the plate, the entire plate is considered hers, and everything on that plate is considered leftovers, and he cannot eat from that plate. However, if the plate came out, there's chicken, there's salad, there's potatoes heaped on the plate, and she says, I can't eat all this. This is too much for me. And she has not yet touched any of it. She is allowed to take from that plate and put onto his plate so that he could eat it. It's not leftovers. She hasn't left anything over because she hasn't started eating yet. That's a very important differentiation between if she started even from one item on the plate, the whole plate's leftovers, but if she didn't take anything from the plate yet, then nothing is leftovers. Let's say you have a challah that you're cutting on Shabbos to distribute to everybody. You might think that after you give a slice of challah to your wife, the entire rest of the challah is a leftover. Maybe you would even think that's the reason why I cut for myself first, then I cut for my wife. The reason why we cut for ourselves first is the halacha that has to do with hilchos brachas. If you're the one who made the bracha, you have to eat it first. Then the next one you can do is give it to your wife. Of course, she's a nida, so you're allowed to pass that towards her, but you can't put it down directly in front of her, just like you can't serve a meal directly in front of her while she's a nida. However, again, the question is, once you cut a slice for yourself, very good, she could have your leftovers. Can you cut more slices of challah to have yourself, or is it now leftovers from her that you're eating? And the answer is, no, it's not leftovers. This challah was for everybody. And if this challah was for everybody, then it's not like it's her challah and you're now eating a leftover piece from the challah. However, once you understand that it's not leftovers from hers, you're then understanding that the challah is everybody's. It's almost as if the challah was on the serving plate or serving tray. And the halacha is that he and she cannot eat from the same serving tray. So how does that work? You took from that serving tray, the challah board, you had a piece from that challah. She also had a piece from that challah. How can you do that? The only way you could really do it is if the challah is put down on each person's separate plate. So you might take first and take a bite right away. She has to make sure that her challah actually lands on her plate before she picks it up and eats it. There are those who we mentioned last time who are mekel, that it's enough to put it on the tablecloth in front of her, but it doesn't seem to be that way according to most poskim. The challah has to actually be on the plate of her own private plate, just like any other thing that's from a serving tray in the middle of the table. You take the piece of chicken from there, put it on your plate, she takes a piece of chicken, puts it onto her plate. It's got to be on separate plates in order to not have this chiba, this endearment that's caused from two people eating from the same plate. Let's say you have a potato chips bag. And this is a very major shiloh. In fact, the first question that was asked to me after the shir last week was about potato chips bags. So apparently this is a big question. I guess we're not talking about one of these tiny little bags, which are very personal, but a slightly larger bag. Family size, or they have the smaller ones that are not family size for 10 people, but a bag that could easily be eaten by one person, or could be easily eaten by two people. Let's say the chips bag is being eaten in mind when it started, it's there for everybody. So if the potato chips bag is made for everybody, so of course husband and wife cannot, even not hands at the same time, even alternating, cannot eat from the same bag. That's the serving plate. And since that's the serving plate, they cannot both have from that bag unless they take from the bag and they put it onto separate plates. So if they're very informal type of people who eat the chips with their hands, and they're both eating with their hands from that potato chips bag, that's a problem. You cannot do that when one's wife is a nida. You can't do that. But if they actually put it on the separate plates, again, that breaks the chiba, that breaks the endearment, and then it would be mutter to do. That's assuming that the potato chips bag was started with the intention that everybody's going to be eating from it. However, if you, the man, starts eating from the bag, it's my bag, I'm planning on eating the whole thing, she can eat the rest because that's just your shirayim. Once you're sure that you're done eating from that bag, you can reassure her, I'm done, then it's only your shirayim. It no longer constitutes it never was a bag for everyone, it was your bag. Now it's your leftovers, she can eat your leftovers. But let's say she starts the potato chips bag, and she has a quarter of the bag, half the bag. Now, can you eat from it? Technically, it's shirayim. Her shirayim, you cannot eat. And the halacha is with shirayim, that the man cannot eat the woman's shirayim, even if those chips are put into a different plate. The different plate only works when you're dealing with a serving plate that's for everyone. Each person puts into their own plate, and now it's mutter. But if it's shirayim, if the potato chips bag was started by the wife, and everything that's left in the bag is her leftovers, it was her bag, and it's her leftovers, even if you take that out and put it onto a separate plate, that does not break the endearment, and therefore this harchaka remains, that you would not be allowed to eat the remainder of that potato chips bag. That is only until she leaves the room. If she leaves the room without intention of coming back, she's completely done with it. It's not enough just to announce, I'm not eating anymore. She's got to be out of the area. Once she leaves the room, or the bag gets put away into a closet. Exactly what happens if the bag is in the closet for a day and she happens to be in the room and you happen to take the bag and take from it, I was never able to fully clarify that. That's a hard one. But for sure, if she's not there, then the shirayim from her potato chips bag is mutter for the man to eat. When it comes to shirayim in general, let's say she was drinking a cup of soda and she leaves over part of the cup of soda. Again, that's shirayim. You would not be allowed to have her shirayim. But when it comes to drinks, if you take her shirayim, her leftovers, and pour it into a separate cup, you would be allowed to drink those leftovers from the separate cup. When it comes to shirayim of solid, in general, you will not be able to move it into a separate plate and then eat from there, as we said before. Shirayim is not considered, it's not ended as shirayim, even if you move it into a different plate if it's solid, only if it's liquid. There is an exception that if the solid thing is something that needs a utensil to eat it with, it's hard for me to think of a good example, some sort of a watery cholent that you're going to have to serve in a bowl. You can't just put it out on the table, flat onto the tablecloth. Something like that, it's like in between a solid and a liquid type of thing, the same halacha would apply. If she started the cholent from her bowl, you could transfer that cholent into another bowl and then eat from that bowl. So again, in general with shirayim, just very simply, when the woman eats something first, then the man cannot eat from her leftovers, even if he transfers it into a different plate or bowl, unless that transferring is similar to the transferring of a liquid that she left over, which needs a utensil to hold it, in which case when you transfer it into a different utensil, the man would be allowed to eat it. It no longer has the status of shirayim. A little bit complicated. That's the end of what we were talking about in terms of eating together. Let's get to the topic of handing to each other, which is one of the most difficult issues when it comes to Hilchas Nida in terms of practical ramifications. You know, we go through life always handing things to each other, and we almost don't think about it. It's very natural. And therefore, it's very hard to understand even how handing something to each other is considered endearing. It's part of life that we always hand things to each other. But it is an amazing thing that when things are handed to each other, it's very easy for people's hands to touch each other. When things are even thrown to each other, and hands will not touch, but there's a certain fun in throwing something from one to the other. All those things lead to endearment. And that again can lead to more and more and more and more, which is the whole issue of all the harchakos, of all these distances that Chazal realized we have to have in order to preserve the proper marital relationship. So the basic halacha is that a husband and wife cannot hand things to each other when she is in nida. This doesn't matter if the thing is small, or or if the thing is large. It doesn't matter if the thing is very long. A broom, it's good 3-4 feet long. I hand one side of the broom to my wife and I'm holding the other. What's the big deal? Something that could be even longer than that, a tape measure. That's a big one. You want to measure the living room because you're trying to find out what size you need for a carpet. So you take this a string type of tape measure or metal tape measure, and you want to go all the way across the room, and you realize you can't really put one hand on one side, one on the other. Simple solution is the husband holds one side, the wife holds the other. And you can't do that because you're handing something one to the other, and the truth is you're even holding the thing together. So it doesn't matter if it's very long, if it's short, if it's large, if it's small. Doesn't matter. Even with a shinui, you can't even hand something in a different way. There are many times in the halacha, especially on dirabbanans, that with the shinui things are mutter. On Shabbos, all sorts of things can be done in terms of muktzah if you do it in an interesting way. But no, it doesn't work. I want to hand this to my wife, so I'm usually a right hand, hands it like this. To hand it with the left hand doesn't make that much of a difference. To hand it to her like this, so that I'm holding it under my arm, doesn't make that much of a difference. So therefore, the halacha remains, even with a shinui, one cannot hand things from husband to wife or wife to husband. Furthermore, you cannot drop it into her open hand. She cannot drop it into your open hand. It's a famous maisa that where this doesn't apply, by chupas nida. So that gets a little bit complicated. It doesn't happen that much these days because most of the women are taking all sorts of pills before the wedding. But it does happen occasionally. And when the chassan is supposed to put the ring onto the woman's finger, so he can't touch her finger because she's a nida. Instead, what he does is he drops it into her hand. So it's one exception to the rule in that situation. With all the cameras and everything going, that's what's done. And there was a famous maisa with one Rosh Yeshiva in my yeshiva who said into the microphone, not knowing the microphone was trained on his mouth, and the chassan will now put the ring into the kala's hand. So people started wondering why was that done. And if you had any idea why, it was a little embarrassing. Okay? It was a little bit of a mistake. So you cannot drop things into a person's hand. Furthermore, let's say she has a pocketbook and she's holding it, it's over her shoulder. You cannot put things into the pocketbook, cannot take things out of the pocketbook. If the pocketbook is on the ground and she's not holding it, of course, you can put things in and take things out. But if she's strapped over her shoulder or otherwise holding the pocketbook, then you cannot put things in or take things out. This would also be true if she's strolling and pushing a stroller. And you have the stroller, and may have a compartment on the bottom, and she's pushing the stroller, and you have some item that you want to stick underneath the stroller, or hand to the baby that's in the stroller. Can't do that. It's really connected to her, and she's pushing it, and that also is something that leads to endearment, which also is true when you have a shopping cart. And you're pushing the shopping cart, you're very chivalrous, so you're pushing the shopping cart, and she's spending all your money, taking all the things off of these shelves, and she wants to throw it into the shopping cart. Can't do that while you're holding it. You have to quickly take your hands off, let her throw things in, and you can put your hands back on and start strolling it more, rolling it along more. But as long as you're holding it, she cannot put things into the shopping cart, or vice versa. If she's pushing the shopping cart, you can't put things into the shopping cart. If you have something in a pocket of your pants or your jacket or your shirt, she cannot remove it. She cannot take a pen out of the shirt like that or put something in. Take your wallet out of your pocket or your keys out of your pocket or put the keys into the pocket. Holding 100 things and she wants to make sure that your car keys are returned to you. She can't put that into your pocket. Of course, it works that way with the wife also, but wives don't often have pockets, one of the deficiencies of women's clothing. Also, you're not supposed to throw things to each other. As we said before, there's a little bit of a fun aspect to that, to throwing, and therefore, even though there's no direct connection, you're not really handing to each other, but throwing is a sort of handing. It could even be, a case could be made for even sliding things across a table, like a set of keys that you have to slide all the way across the table. That same fun aspect is there. The fact that it actually was going on a solid object in between me and my wife does not make a difference. So if you roll it along or slide along a table, that still should not be done. And bouncing also should not be done. To bounce it to her should not be done. All of those things are supposed to be avoided when one's wife is a nida. B'shas hadchak, one can throw something to their wife or wife to husband in what we would call a pop fly. You throw it all the way up, and it comes all the way down. But a line drive is always going to be a problem. They're not going to catch it anyway with a line drive or a pop fly. But that's the reason why. There's also halacha. Let's say you don't throw it within her strike zone. You don't throw it in the area where it's easier to catch. You throw it 3 feet to the right. You shouldn't do that either, even if she's not a good first baseman. It's still, that same fun element is there. And that element is something that makes this type of activity not appropriate during this time. Rather, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to put it on the table, the keys, the cell phone, whatever it is, you put it on the table and you let her pick it up. It's interesting that the post can point out that, let's say she is holding on to the garbage can and you want to sweep and dustpan, and then you want to dump it into the garbage can, and she's holding open the garbage liner or the garbage can altogether, and you're taking a foul shot or a 3-point shot from the other side of the dining room while you're cleaning up. I once saw this in somebody's house. It was wild, even with china. I saw they're throwing china to each other. It was you could break the thing, but here they're throwing the garbage out into it, but still, even though it's garbage, she's never going to take it out from there. You're not throwing it to her. But if she's holding the garbage can or vice versa, you're holding it and she's throwing it in, that would still be a problem. And also to remove from such a receptacle would similarly be a problem. If one person's holding the garbage, another one says, oh yeah, I forgot my diamond ring in there. So you can't go diving in to get the diamond ring while the spouse is holding the garbage open. It should be just left there, and hopefully one of the children, if there are children, will help out, and you'll be able to just get into the bag and take out what you have to take out. I think it should be obvious at this point that you cannot put something in the spouse's lap, a laptop or a book or anything else of that sort. If a spouse is sleeping and their blanket fell off and it's cold and you would like them to be covered appropriately, you can't cover her with the blanket. Even though she's asleep, she's not even going to feel it. You cannot cover her with the blanket at that time. Rav Moshe talks about a telephone wire, which nobody knows what that is anymore. So I'm going to talk about a computer wire, a laptop plug, or even vacuum cleaners, which still have wires that plug into the wall. Let's say one spouse is vacuuming, and there's a wire that goes 10, 15 feet across the hall, and it's, for whatever reason, in your way. You can move that wire, push it down in order to go over it, or whatever it is, pull it up in order to go under it. You're allowed to do that, because you're really not moving the equipment, you're just moving the wire. Moshe says it on a telephone, when you have telephones that used to be attached by wires to the wall, so he could technically jump rope with the telephone wire for all we care. It doesn't matter. That is just attached to the thing that she's holding, and that's not considered moving the phone or the computer or the laptop that she is holding. If, however, let's say the wife is holding a child, the husband should not be feeding the child while the wife is holding the child. Let's say the husband's holding the child, the wife wants to kiss the child. The wife should not be kissing the child while the husband is holding the child. Here comes a tough one with some kids. If one spouse is holding the child, the other one should not be dressing the child. However, poskim say, b'shas hadchak, and anyone who has or had little children knows what that means. B'shas hadchak, when a kid can get very feisty, then one can hold the child while the other one dresses the child. So b'shas hadchak, it's okay, but l'chachila, it should not be done that way. I think that should be true even with the feeding of a child. I think so. That if the child is really feisty and you got to hold the child so the other one can feed the child, I mean, I don't like to talk about force feeding. So that's very good. Medicine, thank you. I think that's a very good example. So I think it's the same thing with the medicine. That's an excellent example. That one will hold the child and the other one will put the medicine in. Yeah, that's a very common case. Okay? Also, I think it should be obvious that even though one spouse cannot brush off or blow off lint from the other's suit jacket or whatever it is, one cannot fan their spouse with their hand, or even using a piece of paper. They cannot do that. However, it should be okay to move an electric fan in the direction of the spouse, or an air conditioning vent, let's say in a car, to turn it towards the spouse. That should be okay. The couple cannot push a baby carriage together. Say, especially on Shabbos when there's no Erev, but forget that. The couple cannot push a baby carriage together. Also, they cannot lift anything together. I know my wife and I have had this problem a number of times that we have guests coming and we need to move the dining room table. And the dining room table is a big, heavy thing. And you would think there's no chiba involved here whatsoever. Two people holding this huge table with 10, 12 feet apart from each other. But nevertheless, even a long, heavy dining room table, they cannot lift together. And this is true even when others are helping. Sometimes you need more than two people just to lift some of these heavy dining room tables. But the husband and wife cannot do this together on one object. It is mutter if, let's say, the wife is lying in bed and the husband is getting the baby out of a crib and bringing the baby to his wife, let's say for nursing and so on. He is allowed to put the baby onto her bed, onto her blanket, not onto her, but onto her bed, onto her blanket would be mutter. It would be mutter to put a phone onto the bed, onto the blanket. I'm not so sure about putting the phone onto the pillow that her head is on. I wouldn't do that. But onto the bed and onto the blanket where it's not really going to move her even after it touches the bed or the blanket, I wouldn't worry about that. But a phone onto the pillow, or the pillow, she really feels the phone coming onto the pillow, I would avoid the phone onto the pillow. Handing a baby to each other. One of the most difficult things, a lot of young couples ask me after they have a baby, so they want to have the wife go to the mikveh as soon as she can. Of course, a woman after having a baby should not go to the mikveh until she's checked by a doctor to be sure that the cervix is closed. Otherwise, that could be very dangerous, going to the mikveh when the cervix is still open. And usually there's a 6-week after birth checkup. So at some point after that, the woman wants to go to the mikveh, which is fine. And often, it's not even possible for tashmish to happen at that point in time because there's a lot of trauma that happens in that area by a birth. But they just want to hand things to each other. They just want to hand the baby to each other. The first 5-6 weeks of the baby is very, very hard to hand the baby to each other. Instead of having to put the baby down in a bassinet or into a car seat, and then the other one picks up and put down onto the baby blanket. And it's hard. But that's what we have to do. Handing a baby should not be done until the baby is old enough that when the baby is facing the spouse, it starts to go towards the spouse. And as soon as they start to go towards that spouse, then you're even allowed to hand the baby directly to the spouse. Because the baby's already moving itself, and therefore it's not considered handing. Or, if for whatever reason there's sakana involved, and it doesn't have to be sakana of dinei nefashis, it could be just, the baby could fall, then you hand the baby to your wife. Don't be stupid, as they say. Sometimes it happens that you have to transfer the baby on the regular back seat of the car, or front seat of the car, and usually that can be done safely. Husband can put the baby down, and the baby's not yet ready to start rolling over yet, and the wife can pick up the baby. But if there's any suffix whatsoever that there's going to be any danger to the baby, and again, not life-threatening, any danger whatsoever, there are poskim who are makel with babies completely, always saying that it's mutter, though it's a tremendous chiddush to say such a thing. Basically, the svara is that a baby is always a chola she'ein bo sakana, so it's a chola. So chola is something that we usually use to matir d'Rabbanan. Since handing is only d'Rabbanan, so for a chola she'ein bo sakana, we can be matir. However, most poskim say that's not such a good svara because if you're not doing something that puts the baby into the situation of some sort of chola she'ein bo sakana, but you just want to hand because it's convenient, it's not appropriate to use that kuli. You can't just say, the chefs of the baby is a chola she'ein bo sakana, and therefore it's all mutter. It's a very hard svara to buy, but there are poskim who say it. So if there's any situation where there is some degree, even minor sakana, then hand the baby from spouse to spouse without any question whatsoever. And in this regard, I mention this in shul many, many times. When it comes to the harchakis, and it's most difficult when it comes to handing, but it applies to all the harchakis. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes that harchakis are supposed to be kept even in public. And he writes, but the women are sometimes embarrassed. Now everyone knows. Instead of me handing the car keys to my husband, I put it down on the table so he could pick it up. Everyone's going to be embarrassed that I'm a nida. And Rav Moshe laughs at this, and he says, you're not supposed to feel that way. What's embarrassing about being a nida? Used to be in the old days, the women wore different clothing during the time that they were nida. The problem is, as modern day poskim have looked at this shaila over and over and over, the women of today are not like the women of yesterday, and they are embarrassed. Nevertheless, Rav Moshe wrote that the harchokos have to be kept even in public. So certain things have occurred over the last 30, 40, 50 years to adjust to this somewhat. One is, and I think this is the more yeshivish approach, that in public they keep all the harchokos all the time. Meaning, in public, husbands and wives never hand anything to each other. They always put things down onto the table and the other one picks it up. That way, no one ever knows the difference. I'm a nida, I'm not a nida, no one knows. And that's one approach, which definitely seems to me the more yeshivish approach. Of course, the other approach is, not like Rav Moshe, all the time, forget the harchokos in public. Anyway, what's going to happen? If I hand something to my husband's wife, right now we're going to get all carried away? There are people here, it's not going to happen. The problem is that Rav Moshe apparently understood that the act that's being done now is not being restricted by the Rabbanon because you might come to do something now. But rather, it created a certain click in the relationship, a chiba click, that hours later may cause a problem to happen. Alternatively, it might be that since that act is an act which inherently can lead to something, even though the situation external to it is that there are other people around and that might be a safeguard, but the act itself is an act of endearment, and as such, Chazal assered it. So that's what Rav Moshe held, that it's asur. But again, there are those who hold that all the time harchokos do not apply in public. I always mention this because Chacham ein of barosho. A person has to be wise and keep his eyes in his head. There are times that it will be absolutely impossible, or at least close to impossible, to be makbid on the harchokos, especially when it comes to handing to each other and you are in public. So one should know that there is room to be mekel, but that's the 1% of the time. 99% of the time, our Yerush Shemayim tells us that Rav Moshe was right, and we have to keep the harchokos even in public. But you have to know when to be mekel. And I'll only give one example, only because it's occurred to me, and I've on occasion announced to my wife, going into an airport, and you're traveling with a number of children, and especially we're going to Eretz Yisrael, and passports and IDs, and every 3 feet they ask again for the passports and the IDs, and you're carrying this and carrying that, and all the handbags, and it is so complicated, and they push you along, and it's a very tense period of time. There are people behind you, people in front of you, and security all over the place, and it's just much simpler than trying to find a safe place to put down your driver's license, so that all the driver's license can be given to the next security person who has to look at all of them. So it's a lot easier than finding a place to put it down where the other one can then pick it up, just put it into the hand and that's it. And be careful not to touch. Be careful not to touch. But there are situations where it could be very, very tense, and it's very appropriate to know that there is room to be mekel in such a situation. And again, Chacham ein of barosho, to use it sparingly, but one should know that such a kula exists. Okay, a few more minutes, good. Okay. Traveling together or sitting together. We're always very careful when we buy a couch that the couch should not be a one-piece couch. The cushion should be multiple cushions, because the husband and wife should not be sitting on the same cushion together if the movement of one will be felt by the other. You sit down on the cushion and she sits on the other side of the same cushion. She's going to feel it, or you're going to feel it. Whoever sat down first is going to feel the second one sitting down. That should not be done. However, if you have a solid, stable park bench, solid wood, then the couple may sit down together on that bench. If you're therefore in a subway car, which is a solid bench, where sitting down on one side is not going to be felt by sitting down on the other side, the husband and wife can sit together on the same bench, but they should be careful not to touch each other. In fact, even their clothing should not touch each other. So you're going in the winter and you have big coats on, you have to sit with enough distance between the two of you that the clothing does not even touch. And sometimes that's impossible. Therefore, it's better for, we'll call it the husband, to stand so his wife can sit, even if someone else can then sit next to her. However, there is a kula, and sometimes it's important to use this kula. If there's somebody in between the husband and wife, they're not sitting right next to each other, then it would be okay, even if they're on the same cushion, even if they would feel the movement one to the other on that cushion. This is a very important thing to know if you're on your way to a chasana, and the husband and wife who's driving the car are sitting in separate seats, because the front seats are made separately these days in most cars, and you're getting a ride with them, and you and your wife are sitting in the back, and it's usually just one seat in the back. So what do? She's a nida. If I sit down and she sits down, we have a problem. The answer is somebody has to sit in between you. Oh, that's comfortable. The other fellow who's coming also, the bacher, who also needs a ride because this is his friend's first cousin's wedding, and he heard it was a good smorgasbord. So he's supposed to sit in between the husband and wife. Extremely uncomfortable. So what you have to do is you have to put something else in between. There's something else that could be in between the husband and the wife. It could be a briefcase, or it could be a pillow, or it could be a box, or it could be a handrest, or a newspaper, or a pocketbook. Pocketbook is usually what works the best. If the husband is sitting in the middle, he gets the less comfortable seat, and then the wife comes in and puts the pocketbook in between them, so that would be mutter, even though he will feel her sitting on that seat. They should try as much as they can not to touch, and for their clothing not to touch. It's sometimes impossible, and one should do the best they can. But if they touch a little bit, it's not terrible, but it's better for nothing to touch at all. Sometimes if you're flying on an airplane, so of course you would think they could sit next to each other. My sitting in one seat is not going to affect my wife sitting in the other seat. However, they're so right next to each other, you always bump into each other. This is true even if it's not your wife. It's very uncomfortable in airplanes. They're so tight together, so they want to get as many people off the airplane as possible. So you're sitting right next to you keep bumping into people. So usually there's a handrest. And that at least provides this heter of something being in between. And then you just have to do the best that you can in order not to touch each other. The best would be if you're sitting in 3 seats and a child is sitting in between the husband and wife. That never is questioned by anybody. It doesn't even look strange. That could work on a subway. It could work on a bus. It could work on an airplane. By the subway, by the bus, you also have to be careful of one other thing. Buses, when they move, people sometimes jostle each other as they move back and forth. And you have to be very careful for that. If you're going to sit so close to your wife and the bus makes a left and she's going to be on top of you, or you're going to be on top of her, so that should be avoided. And it's probably better to for one of you to stand or to sit with something in between you that's more significant, because that's something that could happen. It won't happen so much on the subway. It could. It won't happen so much on an airplane, but it could. But on a bus, it happens very often that the people will actually land on top of each other if they're not careful. And that is all the issues with traveling together, with sitting together, and so on. I'm just going to conclude with a few things that I thought just should be mentioned that are not necessarily, has really nothing to do with the harchakis at all, which is what we really spoke about last time and this time, except to say, as I started last time, that whatever is osir b'shas iser, all these harchakis, one should use these things to create chiba b'shas heter. Eat from the same potato chips bag. Eat from the same plate without necessarily putting it into separate plates. Have that soda with 2 straws in it. All those things which cause endearment. Learn from the harchakis, the Chazal tell us, cause endearment, therefore b'shas nida, you have to stay away. Use those things b'shas heter to cause the endearment between husband and wife to be stronger. Second thing we should always remember, all these inyanim have to do with the chiyuv that a husband has to a wife of ona. Ona literally means intimacy, but ona also means time. And all of us, myself included, have to always keep in mind our wives need some of our time. And it's amazing that it has to be pointed out, but it does have to be pointed out. Many Rosh Yeshivas, poskim, have pointed out that a husband should try his best, at least once a month, to take his wife out to something. It doesn't necessarily have to be to eat, but it's something that's very important to do at least once a month, and to plan such a thing for a few days after going to the mikveh. It's usually not a good idea to do those things on the night one's wife goes to the mikveh, but a few days after she goes to the mikveh, and hormonally those few days after the mikveh is more positive time for the wife. If you wait till the end of the niddah period, hormonally she's already on the way down. But those first couple days after one's wife goes to the mikveh is a very good time to take one's wife out to eat. The eitzah that I have mentioned in the past is that if you look in the Gemara tells us in Maseches Be'ah that even though all of our parnasa is decided on Rosh Hashanah, that does not include what we lay out for Shabbos Yontif, and on the footnotes, the bottom of the page, it says that includes Rosh Chodesh as well. So that's a good time to take your wife out to that expensive restaurant, because you're paying for Rosh Chodesh food, and now it's Rosh Chodesh, so maybe everyone should go out tonight, and now that it's Rosh Chodesh, and you're not paying for it. You're not paying for it. It's not included in the amount of money that's given to you by HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Rosh Hashanah for the year, so it costs nothing. Rav Victor Miller used to say, and I'm going to say it in my own words, he used to say that at least once a week a couple should have a talk walk or a schmooze cruise. It's very important to find some time together, alone, without anybody else around, to just talk. And even though we like to say yes, we should do that every day, but unfortunately statistics have shown that does not happen, especially now that there's texting. Even the grocery list is texted, and we don't even have those 4 minutes a day, which is the national average, they say, to talk to each other about what we need to pick up from the grocery or whatever it is on the way home from work. So therefore, at least once a week, there should be either a talk walk or a schmooze cruise. Another thing that I always mention to anybody who's willing to listen, pink tissues. Pink tissues, at least in the master bedroom. This stops so many shilas with ksomim. So many shilas are stopped with pink tissues. There are poskim who are makil that all tissues will not qualify as a kesem, and therefore it's not a problem. But there are many poskim who are machmir for tissues. But pink tissues, they're not going to be machmir for. And because once it's pink, anything colored, but pink tissues exist, and you really can't tell what the color is. So therefore, it's very, very important to have those. I always tell, if women go to work, take some in the pocketbook. Never run into problems with the tissues. There's just too many. I get too many tissues in the mail. It's just not worth it. Pink tissues, pink tissues, pink tissues. Also, the Ramah says in Siman Chaf Aleph in Even HaEzer Sif Hey, De'ein linhog afilu im ishto b'dvarim shel chiba b'fnei acherim. A person should not act in ways of endearment in front of others with his wife. This is going to be my next article for the Jewish Echo that they will not accept, that men and women, even married, should not be holding hands in the streets. And it's a problem. It's a problem. And I unfortunately, I see it all the time. It should not be. You want to be in the privacy of your own home, hold hands all you want. I tell you, it's a good idea. It's a great idea. But in the streets, dvarim shel chiba are supposed to be kept private. And finally, what I always mention in terms of shalom bayis, what I call the box theory, every person grows up in their own box. They grew up with parents that are different than your parents. They grew up in schools that are different than the yeshivas you went to. Every single person is so different in what they perceive as normal than the way you perceive things as normal. And if a person keeps that in mind, it solves many problems of shalom bayis, because there's no reason for a person to roll their eyes and think disparagingly of the way their wife does something, or the way their wife wants to do something, or thinks is normal, or thinks is correct. There are many ways of doing things. And if you just recognize that she has a different box than I do, and I have a different box than she does, and the truth is, any woman would be in a completely different box than any man. That's definitely a way for a person to calm himself down and just say, this is just the way it is. There are many differences between men and women, and as long as we understand them, even if we don't have a full understanding of them, we can be understanding of them, and Be'ez Hashem will be able to live our lives with proper shalom bayis. So Be'ez Hashem, we should all be zocheh to fulfill our obligations of ona and all that it entails, both the positives and the negatives, as described in the last two shiurim. This would lead to an increase in our shalom bayis. We should continue to be zocheh to build batei neman b'Yisrael l'shem u'siferes. I want to thank Irgun Shirei Torah for giving us the idea of these shiurim, and I want to thank everybody for coming.